All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Melissa Tui, and I am the EdTech Adoption Specialist here at Ozobot. And we are very happy to welcome you to our STEAM and social distancing webinar. We have two really amazing educator guests, expert guests here to share with you today. And we'll go ahead and get started. For our agenda, we have a couple of poll questions for our audience, just so we can get to know what your needs are, what situation you're in. We know that the last few weeks have been pretty hectic for most educators. So we just wanted to get an idea of where everyone stands and what our audience, what what you're all dealing with. So we have a couple poll questions that we're going to ask you. Then we'll go through our introductions for our expert panelists. We'll do a panel discussion, and then we will also have a Q&A at the end from our audience. So with Zoom, there is that Q&A feature. If you have a question for one of our panelists, please go ahead and type in that question in the Q&A, and we'll dedicate the last probably quarter of the hour or last 20 minutes to answering audience questions. And we'll jump right into it. So we have a poll question. We want to know more about what your situation is. And we'll go ahead and get started. So on your screen, you should see a poll asking how confident are you in distance learning. We just want to gauge what everyone, what their situation is like right now. So go ahead and answer that question. We have about 6 questions total for you. Looks like we have about half of participants that have voted. If you have not gotten your vote in, please do so. Great. Let me share the results. And it looks like about over half of you are fairly confident. Some of you are confident, and a quarter of you are about not confident at all. So I think you're in the right place because we have some really great insights from educators to help us through this current moment. Poll question number 2. Has your school begun online instruction with students? Go ahead and take a moment to answer that question. Has your school begun online instruction with students? Great, I'm gonna give everyone about 5 more seconds to respond, and then I'll end the poll. Great. I'm going to share the results. It looks like over half have begun online instruction. Some are still waiting on the district, and a small amount are not going to be able to implement online instruction. So that's really great for us to know the context of what everyone is facing within their own situations. Poll question number 3. Do your students have access to technology at home? Results are coming in. I'm going to give everyone about 5 more seconds to answer. Great. And it looks like most students of the educators here do have access to technology. And some are on, some have some students that have access, and some don't, and all of their students have access. So we have a pretty widespread, but it looks like most students have access. Poll question 4. How many hours per day are you as an educator supposed to engage in direct instruction with your students? In this current moment with school closures, we're wondering how much time you're expected to spend with students engaging in direct or remote learning. And I'll give everyone about 5 more seconds to answer. All right, let me share the results. Wow, quite a few of us are not expected to engage in direct instruction with students. And some it looks like the 1 to 4 hours is about average, and then 4+, there's very few. So that's really great information for us to know and for our panelists to know as well. We're gonna move on. We have a few more questions for you. Are you an Ozobot user? This one's an easy yes or no. Do you currently use Ozobots with your students or in your classroom or have one? Lots of yeses coming in. That's exciting. And for those that answered no, no problem. This is super open-ended for us to support you. You don't have to have an Ozobot to participate in today's forum. We want to reach all educators and support all educators in today's forum, regardless of if you have an Ozobot or not. So I'm going to end the poll, and it looks like most of us do have Ozobots and some of us don't. So those of you that are not current users, welcome. We're so excited to have you here today. And let's see, next question. If you are an Ozobot user, did you bring your Ozobots home? Were you able to bring them home with you to either plan or do instruction or just play around with, if that's what you like to do in your free time? I'll give us about 5 more seconds to answer that question. Great. Okay, it looks like most of us were not able to bring our Ozobots home, about half, and then half can either pick them up or have them on hand. So that's great information for us to know. And I believe we have one last question for you. If you have access to your Ozobots, would you benefit from a webinar about using Ozobots while teaching remotely with no student Ozobot access required? So you would have an Ozobot, but your students would not necessarily need one. Would you be interested in a webinar on how to teach with that environment and those circumstances? Great. It looks like overwhelmingly educators in this webinar are yes, they would benefit from that. So that's something that we have noted, and we're hoping to bring to you as soon as possible so that you can feel supported during this time. Great. Okay, I am going to go ahead and move on and welcome our panelists. We have 2 panelists with us here today. We have Kristen Albright, who is a STEM teacher in Pennsylvania. She is national board certified, has won various awards. She's a certified Ozobot certified educator, and we're just so thrilled to have her because her expertise and insight is just so invaluable. Kristen, was there anything else you'd like to add to your intro for people to know?
I just wish I had a nice background like Abby's. It's in Pennsylvania already. It looks so nice where you are right now. I'm basically in a closet. We have so many different people in so many different rooms all doing different things here in my house. So I just wish I were where Abby was. That's what I'd like to say.
Great, thank you. And we also have Abby Bash, who is with the Buckley School. She's the director of experiential and service learning. She's also in UCLA's educational leadership program, pursuing her doctoral degree. And another fun note that I love about Abby is that she's also very interested in teaching 21st century skills through theater. So something that we're passionate about at Ozobot as well is 21st century skills and how do we prepare students for tomorrow. And Abby's on that same page through theater, and I love that about her. Abby, is there anything else that you would like our attendees to know about you?
Nope, that's it. I'm sorry I can't share the California weather with Kristen and with our other, attendees.
Great, awesome. So what we are going to do is I'm just going to very quickly go over how you as attendees can participate today. If you have a question for our panelists, for Abby or Kristen, use that Q&A to ask those questions, and we'll ask them at the end of the webinar. If you have comments or insights into a question that somebody else has asked, you can also comment directly under the question. So we love engagement. We know that teachers learn best from one another. So please, if you have any important information to share or insights, feel free to engage using the chat or the Q&A feature. And you can also upvote the questions that other people have submitted if you'd like them to, if you also want the answer to that question, if that makes sense. So upvoting is also a feature in our Q&A. So we'll jump right through it, or jump right into it. For our panelists, I'd love to ask them, what's the biggest challenge your school or district has faced, and how has this been addressed? And we'll go ahead and we'll start with Kristen.
Thank you. Yes, our biggest challenge that we have right now is we were on spring break when all the shutdowns started happening. So people were all over the place, all over the world, really. And so to try to get everybody to come together, some families have chosen to stay where they were. Some families are in self-quarantine. So to try to get the devices that are in the schools out into the hands of the children in the safest way possible has been awfully difficult. What we have done, if you can imagine, at the beginning of every, teachers sent home polls to the parents asking who needed their device, and those that responded pulled up curbside, and someone with gloves put it in the trunk of the car and sent them on their way. So that's one of the big challenges, and also addressing our English language learners. There's some communication that we're still trying to work out, making sure that every family understands what's being offered, what the expectations are. And outside of Penn State University, not every family has internet access. So we handed out some hotspots, and we're working to get some more. But those are some of the biggest challenges our district has been facing, as well as trying to make sure that we're following the appropriate laws. Right now, our lessons have been optional, to make sure that we're meeting the fair and appropriate public education laws. But we're trying to move into some other directions. We're all kind of just treading water here and trying to keep swimming, as they say. So all of these things that our district is facing, I'm pretty sure is pretty similar in other districts as well.
Great. Abby, do you have any thoughts or insights that you'd like to share?
Yeah, you know, I teach at an independent school, so private school, and I can speak to sort of the difference between what we've been experiencing versus what people in LA Unified USD have been experiencing. In Los Angeles, they're worried about feeding kids. 50% of our kids are they don't eat without school. I know that, I'm also, I didn't mention that I'm also on the board of a charter school that's trying to launch next year in Pacoima, which is a particularly high poverty neighborhood in Los Angeles. And families have been showing up on weekends for food. That's how bad it is. So, also, of course, getting technology out to kids and so on. A lot of schools have opted not to give remote learning, or not to provide it, because that creates an equity gap in public schools. Unfortunately for them, and where I am at the private school I'm at Buckley, every school or every student is online with me every day. We have a remote learning schedule. The kids show up, we take attendance, they have access to technology. If they don't, our school makes sure that they do. And so I do worry, and I'm glad you asked this question, Melissa, but I worry that the gaps that are already there in socioeconomics that divide kids based on who has and who has not, that this coronavirus is actively deepening those gaps, not only in terms of not giving kids literal nutrition for their bodies, but they're not being able to access education, while my students at the Buckley School are, quite easily.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing, Abby. Those are some really great insights. I love that you not only are you speaking to the experience of your students at the private school, but also advocating for the students who are maybe low SES and have different challenges within Los Angeles as well. For our audience, I absolutely forgot to introduce Cassandra Willer, who is our Ozobot content manager. So if you see an extra face on the screen, that is Cassandra. Just wanted to introduce her just so you could put a name to a face. But we'll continue on with our next question as well. So for both Kristen and Abby, what tools do you find most helpful for remote teaching?
Right now, we're using our Chromebooks. Our students are one-to-one, hopefully, with the Chromebooks K to 12. And I work K to 5 as a STEM teacher, and we have found that choosing one particular platform for a learning management system seems to be the most effective. So we went with kindergarten through second grade are doing using Seesaw to communicate back and forth with their teachers, and third through fifth are using Google Classroom. Middle school and high school are using a combination of Canvas and some other things. But at the elementary school level, we wanted to make sure it were tools that the kids had already been using. We're also implementing Flipgrids for some asynchronous activities and Zoom meetings with all the kids K to 5. Every teacher has been reaching out to their students this week in some optional learning activities.
We're using Seesaw in the elementary school. Buckley is a K through 12 school. So in elementary, they're using Seesaw. And in upper school, we're using Zoom. And in addition, in my classes, I use Google Classroom. I also use Pear Deck to create my presentations. I also have been using Newsella for news sources because I teach humanities. So those are the sources I'm using right now. And I would also just say, having spoken to colleagues up in the Bay Area who are in public schools, that they're while it's really great that all these ed tech companies are providing free resources right now, they're nervous about what's going to happen when those are no longer free. And so, for example, in the Bay Area, they're leaning quite heavily on Google Meet rather than on Zoom, just because they know eventually they'll have to pay. So that's another equity issue.
Absolutely. What tips do you have for educators to practice self-care during this time? I know it's super stressful. There's a lot on educators' plates, managing not only their personal lives, but also taking care of all their students, ensuring the learning of their students. Do you have any tips for self-care?
I think the hardest thing that a lot of teachers are dealing with now is that they're home with their own children. They're or taking care of elderly relatives or neighbors. And so, really trying to take some time for yourself is so important. Realizing that you're not going to be able to do the exact same level of instruction that you do in your classroom every single day, and to be kind to yourself. This is all kind of new to most of us in this country. We're not as familiar with distance learning, so just being kind to yourself, taking time to get outside is very important. Of course, maintaining social distances, but taking some time to just appreciate what you have at this time. And journaling, I think, is a really great way to um, keep a tab on your own feelings. And I think it's great for reflecting as well, for thinking about um, what things that you're afraid of or things that you're concerned about, and just being able to get those down on paper. We've also done some really fun hangouts together with other educators and other friends. We have these great tools that allow us to play games with people across the country and visit with family and friends. So taking advantage of some of those technology tools for non-educational purposes really, I think, seems to help. And just taking some time to relax and binge watch or read or whatever you need to do.
For me, I have a dog that Melissa knows about, who used to be an incredibly ill-behaved dog, but suddenly, miraculously, now that I'm home 24 hours a day, is an angel. So it's a great excuse to go on long walks, and I try to go somewhere where there are trees. Keeping my social distance. So that's what I do to take care of myself. I've also started doing like online yoga, which has been really nice. And with my students, I find it really important to check in with them at the beginning. When I teach live, I always do a special secret handshake with each of my classes, so that I give a handshake to each of my kids at the beginning of class. And so I just make sure to say hello, because I'm teaching on Zoom and I can see the kids. I make sure that I say hi to each of them and I check in with each of them. I'll often do a one-word check-in. just to see where they're at. And then also, as Kristen was saying, being gentle on myself when a lesson doesn't go right, because the kids are starting to go stir crazy. I was teaching yesterday, and they, from the Pear Deck, I could tell that they were absorbing zero. And instead of being hard on myself, I could say, okay, they're going as crazy as the rest of us. They can, they're figuring out how to balance being online and still pay attention. So that's important too.
Thank you both so much for sharing. How do you practice classroom management in a remote learning environment? And Kristen, I know that in your situation, they're not necessarily one-to-one in a remote learning environment. So I don't know if you've given tips to parents or, best practices when students are working at home, just something, I don't know if that's been part of your what you've been giving your students, but it's just something to think about because I know your situation is a little bit different than Abby's.
Yeah, I'm not actually teaching my STEM class the way I normally would have at this point, because we are in optional learning activities right now. We're focusing just on reading, math, and writing as the main topics, and we have some choice boards and some other things for specialists like myself, library and art and music. But we have talked about norms. We do a lot of class meetings in our district, and being able to set those norms up right at the beginning when it isn't really academic. Right now the teachers are sharing with their kids, and they have show and tells and a lot of animals being shown directly to the camera in these Zoom meetings this week. Just learning how to not monopolize the time, to learn how to use the mute button, for the teacher to understand that they can use the mute button as a management tool as well, just making sure that everybody gets a chance, and unmuting children who have not had a chance to discuss. But I think setting those norms at the beginning are really, really important. I have seen first grade classes and kindergarten classes, and although the participants are quite wiggly, they're doing a really great job at following those norms that have already been established in the classroom here in the remote environment. Some of our teachers, actually for the very young students, had a chance to go into school and picked up some of the things in their classroom with the bulletin boards and things, and they're putting it behind them to try to make it seem as much like school as possible, what's familiar and comfortable for the students. And I think as you make sure that you're keeping that consistency the same, the students will thrive in this online learning environment, just like they have been in their classrooms.
I love that, Kristen. I think that's such a great idea. It makes me want to go into my classroom and get all the objects that are usually used in there. Even I teach 7th grade, and I think that I've discovered that the more consistent I keep with what we were doing before all of this happened and we went remote, the more the kids are engaged. For me, we do the norms at the beginning of each class, and I've had the kids contribute and add to the list. On top of that, I'm on Zoom, so it's quite easy. There are controls on Zoom to allow me to mute and unmute the kids, to allow me to see the kids. And my lessons have become a lot more regimented than they were in the classroom. I'm kind of I enjoy the organized chaos of a live classroom. And what I've learned is that in order to make sure the kids are staying on task, I give them things to do. And so every minute of my 1 hour with them is planned really carefully, and using tools like I swear by the Pear Deck now, because the kids have to respond to it, and I can see where they're at, and I can take their temperature. And I love doing a little journaling at the beginning with Google Classroom, because I immediately know where they're at. So keeping them busy in the way that's productive, not busy for the sake of busyness, but busy in a way that keeps them engaged and paying attention, has been really, really helpful with my online lessons. And it is very foreign to me to be such a taskmaster as a teacher, but I found that the kids they stay much more on top of it with these kinds of tools.
Great. What measures have been taken to ensure equitable educational practices in the context of both your situations?
This is a really tough situation because I don't know exactly what's going on in every child's home. So everything that we've planned, from the choice boards to the Zoom to the Seesaw, has every activity that we have, we want to make sure that students are able to do a lot of it independently. It may not be as rigorous as it was in the regular classroom, but to make sure that students have that ability to all be successful, I think is really important. We've talked about keeping it open-ended. Teaching STEM, a lot of our things are STEM challenges, and I looked at a lot of resources online, Lego challenges and other things, but then we took a step back and realized not every kid has Legos, not everyone has building materials. So how can you do the same type of challenges where students can come at it from a variety of angles? We've been doing a lot of notice and wonders instead of building with something specific. What do you notice and wonder about outside? What can you design from things that you found outside? We did a challenge where students had to measure something with a non-standard measurement unit. And originally we were going to have them measure their bed, but maybe they don't have a bed. Maybe they're not in a place, maybe they're at grandma's and their bed isn't there. And so we have to make sure that it's all things, when we put it out there, to really look at it through the lens of having basically nothing at home, to make sure it's equitable for everyone. We're also reaching out individually to students. Principals and teachers are calling students to make sure that they have what they need. It's been a real team effort with counselors and our English language teachers, making sure that students are getting their needs met. Having the food provided, as Abby had mentioned, was huge. But making sure that the baseline is met, so students feel comfortable and safe and can access their education in a way, in a comfortable environment, I think is really important. And looking at what they may have at home, and trying to keep it open-ended so they can approach problems in multiple different ways.
Um, I know that our administration has been reaching out to our students who, making sure that everyone has access. And we are, of course, much more forgiving if kids glitch out and there's a if kids can't access things, or if kids are absent from a class due to technology. We're very flexible in that way. I would say for me, what I'm doing as a teacher is that I make sure that all of my resources that I'm using are freely available. That doesn't help if a kid's internet glitches out, but for example, when I have readings assigned, I'll share with them, the amount of copies that the LA Public Library has, and I'll give them a link to that. And I'm always making sure that with all the resources that I provide, that there's a way that if they've forgotten something or they left something at school or they don't have it, that they can access it. At least if they have internet access, they can access it. And then anything that would be cost related, I show, if I have to show a clip or something of a video or whatever, I'll do that. And I'll find a way to do that. It's small enough excerpts during my class that they don't have to pay for it. So that's what I do.
Great, thank you. What is the biggest challenge that your students face, and how have you supported them?
Our students right now are afraid, and I think that's one of the biggest things that people who are outside of education don't understand. That teachers are really a touchstone, a lifeline to a lot of our kids. They're in situations where parents might be out of work right now, and they're all kind of trapped in an apartment or a house together, and they're not really sure how bills are going to get paid. And so our students are hearing a lot of things on the news, and they're hearing a lot of things from parents and friends, and even older students feel quite afraid of what's happening. So this whole week and in going into the future, our Zooms have been pretty much reserved not for direct instruction, but for just checking in with students, having them share. This week, seeing students' faces for me has been huge. And I'm sure students are pretty much the same way. They feel worried. How's their teacher doing? How's the class pet? How are their friends? And by getting to see their friends, it alleviates some of that fear. We forget as adults that the kids have big worries too. And by trying to keep it, as Abby had said, very consistent, keeping it a safe place where kids can express their thoughts, and with those norms, making sure that students are able to to speak freely has been important, and to take that time. It seems like it's not directly related to education, but in the long run, that time you're taking for building those norms, building that sense of community, rebuilding or restructuring how your day is going to look is so important. So many kids rely on the structure of school. And the more that you can provide that type of structure and consistency in your interactions with them, and just letting them know you love them. I mean, there's so many great stories out right now where teachers are driving through neighborhoods and waving at kids, and just making sure that the kids know that we're there for them is the biggest way that we've been able to support them.
I completely second everything Kristen just said. I think that, all the anxiety that we feel as adults, the kids are feeling too, and they might not be able to articulate it as fully, or they might not understand quite what it means. I'm teaching seventh graders and right now, and they're on the cusp of adulthood, and they're reading Lord of the Flies. And in Lord of the Flies, there's a lot of talk of, oh, if the adults were here, if only the adults were here, they would do things differently. And so it's a great opportunity for them to reflect on the fact that they're sort of coming into their own and realizing that maybe the adults don't always know what they're doing. And it's really an interesting rite of passage for these 12 and 13-year-olds that I'm teaching right now. And I think that having this consistency and also giving them spaces for self-expression. I have been doing a lot of writing prompts where the kids can write in their thoughts, and I respond to them. And I think Google Classroom is great for that. And giving them the opportunity to do research. So I teach humanities, so I teach English and history. So for the kids to be able to do a deep dive through Newsella into, what coronavirus is looking like all over the world, what it looks like in Italy versus what's happening in South Korea versus, the race to find a vaccine, depending on what the kids are interested in, they can also engage in that as well. So also giving them information, giving them a space to express themselves. And as Kristen says, letting them know that they're seen and they're heard. And every single class, when I Zoom with them, I say hello to each and every one of them. And I say goodbye to each and every one of them before we sign off, so that they know that they're seen.
I love that. Those responses were absolutely wonderful. Um, the next question is more about, let's see. Oh, I went backwards. The next question is more about the platforms that you both have utilized. I know both of you have named, quite a few different platforms. And I know for some educators, that's quite overwhelming to have to juggle multiple different platforms. And the same could be said from students, right? They have so many different platforms and so many different apps and this and that. What are your, how do you approach juggling all of those different platforms so that it's easier for students to use and understand what they're supposed to be doing, or what, just maintaining that consistency for them so that they can be successful?
I think the most important part is picking one platform and sticking with it. There are pros and cons to just about everything. I mean, we went round and round about which ones were the best for which age groups, but once we pick that, we want to stick with it because parents are familiar with it, students are familiar with it. We want to be able to provide some things that are asynchronous as well as some things that are live. So being able to look at what you want to be able to do. As a former tech coach, one of the things you want to look at when you're evaluating any tool is, what do you want to be able to do? We want to be able to see the students face to face. We want to be able to give out work and collect work. And so we just chose the platforms based on what those things were, tied in with ease of use and also familiarity with these tools with the students. So as I had mentioned before, we did K-2 with Seesaw, 3-5 with Google Classroom. And we're really, really sticking with those because there are so many tools out there. As Abby had mentioned, a lot of things that are free right now that are really quite exciting, but we want to stick with our tried and true things that we are familiar with to make it easier for parents and for children.
Um, I I second that, but I also have to confess that I'm fascinated with technology, and that when I saw all these free services, I got so excited. And I thought, okay, well, I need to maintain consistency for my kids, but I do want to experiment a little bit. And I know that my seventh graders can keep up with it. And I had a very forthright conversation with them about it, about how, okay, we're going to try a couple new things. We're going to see if they work. I'm going to do a poll. I'm going to check in with you guys. We're going to see what you like. And it was fun at first. For the first week, they got excited pressing buttons and trying all these new technologies. And then this week, I could start sensing them developing anxiety and not paying attention as much. And I think that that is just a reflection of what's happening sort of at large with people. And so I made a decision in my last couple classes to go back to basics, as Kristen's saying, you know, using the features on Zoom, just sharing my presentation, using the platform that my school has a website based on Blackboard that is, you know, the kids can, using features that I've used before. And I found that they relaxed a little bit. So now that I've dipped my toes into the more advanced stuff, and they're playing with Google Classroom more often, and they're playing with Newsela, I can go back and use that later. But I'm finding that right now they're enjoying the comforts of the technology they knew before we went remote.
Great, thank you. And this is our last question from Ozobot. So if the audience has any questions, we have a couple queued up in our Q&A, but feel free to type some questions in, because we'll move on to audience Q&A after Kristen and Abby answers our last question, which is, what does a typical remote session look like in your classroom?
Well, this is a question that it's going to, what is a typical remote session? What will it look like? Because we're not quite to, I'm probably breaking up a little bit here, I apologize. So we are looking at doing a I do, you do, or I do, we do, you do kind of model, where either asynchronous or synchronous, live or taped, where teachers are explaining something, students are working through a problem together, and then they have some independent practice before they check in. I keep coming back to the idea, and I know Abby does too, that also providing that time for discussion is really important. Making sure everyone has a chance to be heard is very important. Whether that's a typed response or a video response. Some kids aren't as comfortable. The older my kids get, the less comfortable they are being videotaped. But really, whatever's really good education in a classroom also should be reflected in a remote session as much as possible. And keeping those things the same. I actually did the Pledge of Allegiance this morning with some of the students in a classroom, just because that's how they start their day, and that's how they're going to start their day here. So having a really clear guideline, always looking back to your standards and figuring out how you're going to drill them down in a not necessarily more simplified way, making sure that you're allowing for that differentiation and that the acceleration in different things, but making sure that all students are able to access it, that you have a very clear and packed lesson plan, as Abby had said, and providing some of those experiences both on and offline for kids, I think would be a really great remote session.
And right now we were just kind of thrown into this really quickly. We didn't really do any PD before jumping into this. And so for me, I can just say what I've been doing right now, and I'm about to have a spring break where this might all change completely after I've had time to sort of reflect on what's worked and what hasn't. But because I'm using Zoom on a regular basis, I have my Zoom ready. I have all of my stuff up on my screen. I share my screen right away, including my Pear Deck. The kids have it side by side on a split screen. They're interacting with the Pear Deck and seeing the responses on my screen. And I do, it's the same. So for my English class, I do the same thing. There's a Google Classroom journal response at the beginning with a quote from the book. They do that for 10 minutes. Then I do breakout rooms. Then I do a short mini lesson, and then we do breakout rooms. Then we come back and do a group discussion. So that's my English class. With my history class, I'll do the Pear Deck. They're interacting. I'm teaching some material. They're responding to it. I'm teaching a little more material. They're responding to it. So that's sort of how I've been working through it. And we'll see. It might change when I get back. I'm really, really, really fortunate that I get to Zoom with my kids every day or every other day. I get to see them. And that they have access. It's a gift. And I do want to think about more how I can be creating. One of the things I want to think about over my break is how I can do the asynchronous stuff and how they can be working independently, because I think one of the things is that the kids are really bored. They're like, they're actually hungry to do more stuff. Like, they would probably kick me for saying it, but like, they actually, like, I think they want to read more. They want more things to do that actually challenge and stimulate their minds in the absence of human interaction. So I do want to get better at the asynchronous stuff and figuring out how to harness the technology in a way that the kids can respond when I'm not there.
Yeah, absolutely. We are going to move on to questions and comments from the audience. Lena has a question. Do you have recommendations for resources for educators in the after school or the nonprofit setting?
I think there are so many resources. Of course, I'm going to speak to the arts right now. And I'm not sure what kind of after school setting you're talking about, but basically every major arts organization in the United States right now is providing free resources. They're showing free concerts, for all ages, for adults all the way through kids. And one of the ways I think that we can support the arts and keep them alive in our kids and make our kids realize how important they are is to share those resources with them. So I encourage interacting with arts organization resources. They're available on every one of their websites. And I know there are lists that have been created on Facebook that people have shared. And there was an article, actually, the New York Times just published an article that had a list of like every major arts organization that was sharing free stuff. Like, you can do a free tour of the Guggenheim in 3D. You can watch the Metropolitan Opera in HD. You can, I know that UCLA is doing a concert with Ladysmith Black Mambazo, South Africa's, sort of pride and joy in a week for free online. So that's my suggestion.
I'd like to echo what Abby said. There's so many science resources online too. NASA and aquariums and zoos have so many really fun things. We like our students like to use code.org and Scratch and Scratch Junior, and those are all free. I think they would be great for a nonprofit to do. Scratch and code.org also have unplugged activities that are more game based and in person, and they are wonderful. Very doesn't require a whole lot of resources. So those would be my recommendations for a nonprofit organization trying to keep kids engaged in the academics, but also making them fun educational. I think is really the way to go.
Great. Rebecca has a question. What is a choice board and how does it work?
I realize I should have defined that. It's like a menu board, like a bingo card. And I think it allows kids to choose what's of interest to them. We have 5 specialists in my district: art, library, music, phys ed, and STEM. And we each put 5 different choices on what looks like a bingo board. We didn't want to call it a bingo because bingo means prizes, but it was all different things. And each week we're going to update with more and more things for them to do. Some of them are coding related. I'm just speaking to myself. Art had making a giant color wheel with things that they found in their home. And so it allows, I think, more equity in terms of access, because we wanted to make it all things that kids could do independently, and also things that they would have in their homes to be able to use. So a choice board, they can just choose either across or down. Some parents, we suggested they even make it like a bingo and provide a prize for their own from their home. For the little ones, if they get something, one choice from each special done, either each day or each week. But choices are how we're doing most of our language arts and most of the math and writing in our district right now, to be able to have children feel like they have a little more control over what they're doing because they get to decide how it works for them. I hope that explained it.
Thank you. Do you have any tips for engaging students while waiting on instruction from the district? So this is from Crystal. What are some ideas for teachers that might not have much direction right now from their districts or schools?
Well, legally, you probably want to keep it open, not required. A lot of districts are doing more enrichment of things that they've already covered. I think choice boards are a great way to do that. Or we're now on that Popsicle song. If you have little kids, you probably know it. It's a brain break, and we're challenging kids to do something like that that's fun and getting them moving. Um, by putting it as a challenge, it makes it exciting for students to want to do things. But while you're waiting for it, spend some time with your kids and take that time to start building those norms with your interactions now. Have them do show and tells, have a different day. Tomorrow is hat day in one of the classrooms that I'm going to go be visiting tomorrow online, and start setting up those things, hear how the students are doing with that, and then you can actually be ready when your district gives you those instructions ready to roll out.
Yeah, I don't know that I have much to add on that. I think those are, those are all great ideas. I mean, I think, in my circumstance, if I if I didn't have the access to Zoom with my kids, I would be providing a lot of online resources that are sort of fun games. So for example, with my global studies class, we're doing Africa right now. So I would probably have sort of like, I do some of this within my class, but here's like a fun website where you can learn to play Mancala, or like, here are some fun recipes, like how to make injera bread, or how, sort of things to keep them sort of in the mode that you were learning in, but that are more hands-on and that they can do in their house more reasonably.
Great. I have a question from Olivia, who is asking, how involved are parents and guardians involved in online learning of your students? And she's particularly asking about the younger students in kindergarten who might need technological help from adults. But Abby, I would love to get your insight from your older students as well, how engaged their parents are with their online learning.
Right now, the parents have had to get things set up for the kids, but it's surprising. They're pretty amazing, even in the kindergarten and first grade level, being able to do things because these are tools, Seesaw and Zoom, that they have used before, or Seesaw and Flipgrid, not Zoom, but a lot of the things are similar. We have older children in the home that are often the tech support for the whole family, which is kind of exciting. It gives the older brothers and sisters something to do. We always have videos that our tech department has put out that makes it accessible, and the tools we chose were based on their ability to be used independently. Once the kids figure it out, it goes pretty smoothly, but again, these are the kinds of things that you have to work through at the beginning.
And for me, I have seventh graders right now, so they're doing it on their own. And the most I get from parents, I'll get an email going like, "Is he showing up? Is he okay?" Because he's not telling me. So that's what you get when you get preteens and teenagers. So it's like the parents are less involved, but they want to be, and they want to know that their kids are present and engaged.
Great. I have two similar questions from both Abby and Chelsea. One is asking, what can outside organizations do to support educators during this time? And Chelsea wanted to know in particular about librarians. She's a public librarian. Is there anything that public librarians can do to support teachers during this time?
Well, as a former librarian, I always find them to be one of the most useful people in the I'm trying not to be quite that dramatic, but there's so many different things that they can offer because you're familiar with what's going on outside of the school. You know, those organizations, the arts, especially being able to connect with arts and science museums outside, providing those ebooks. We're finding in our school that we don't have as many ebooks as we should have. So being able to get those on loan from the public library, for librarians, send out information to families about how to get a free library card and access some of those things. The app, you probably know that, where you can get a lot from anywhere and access tons and tons of information.
I second that. We have awesome librarians at Buckley who have gone out of their way to say, what can we do? We want to help you. And I think, like, there are ways in which librarians can put together tools that are, like, first of all, just community resources of what's out there, what different, web information is out there. That we were talking about, like what teachers would say, oh, if you don't have any direction right now, but here are some resources you can look at and play with. But on top of that, as Kristen's saying, to know where the kid can take out a book when the library is physically closed, like that, the information for getting those books, and maybe even, I think age appropriate recommendations for reading for the kids like I've been doing it with my students and my 7th graders, but I think that's a hugely valuable thing. And I think also partnering with teachers, because it's, if we can do sort of closed research projects or sort of scavenger hunts in collaboration with library, I love doing that personally. I love creating those with my kids. I think that's a great partnership, especially as librarians aren't going to be dealing with the physical books, if they even have any, in the libraries they're working with. Now is a time to really have fun partnering with teachers to figure out what kinds of activities. I mean, teachers, I think I can just speak for myself, are hungry for that kinds of information and for that kind of partnership.
I also, had a thought while you both were talking. I'm almost wondering if, a special guest from an outside organization that's an expert, like a rocket scientist or whatnot, would, be beneficial and entice students, because they love their teachers, but they also love special guests, right? So even reaching out or having organizations reach out to teachers to participate in that way and just be a visitor for, a session I can imagine my former students just absolutely loving that. So just something that popped into my head while you both were chatting. So that was great. Chelsea has a question for Kristen in particular. It sounds like her situation is pretty much the same as Kristen's, and she wants to know if there's any particular STEM activities and topics that you think lend themselves to remote lessons.
Great question, Chelsea. We need to connect on Twitter too. Albright Teacher. Follow me on Twitter. We're gonna connect and work some things out here. But we really kick this around. It's tough to think about how the content is. Some things like electricity, we don't want kids really to experiment too much with at home. But we've been talking about density, anything with nature. Are very appropriate. When we're talking about building challenges, they're very appropriate. Talking about structure and function, we really have drilled our challenges down to doing. We use the engineering design process: ask, imagine, plan, create, and improve. And as long as we keep everything coming back to that engineering design process, I think just about anything could fit in there. But I know, like, as I said, we're putting our electricity unit on hold for a little while. There are some online activities you can do for electricity, but we certainly don't want children experimenting with electricity on their own right now. But anything with nature would work really well. Anything with structure and function, as I said, cause and effect, and really making sure that you're hitting all those different parts of whatever model you use, whether it's the engineering design process or design thinking or whatever you do. Try to keep it focused on what your main tools are. We decided that we wanted children to realize 3 things while they're doing this right now: that engineering is everywhere, that engineering is fun, and that their STEM teachers are here to support them. So if every activity does those 3 things, then we consider it to be a success.
And I just put up the contact information for Kristen. She's on Twitter, and her Twitter handle is on there in case you want to reach out. She also posts some really amazing content of different things that her students do in the classroom. So she's just such a great source for inspiration for STEM and STEAM activities. And Abby, I hope it's okay that I shared your email address as well in case people wanted to reach out and ask any questions. I know Abby has been in the remote learning situation a little bit longer than most of us, as her school decided to transition a little bit earlier than most people. So she has a lot of great insights into what has worked and what hasn't. And then for those of us in the audience who are looking for that PD certificate, if you email heather@ozobot.com, she can get that for you as well. And I think we have a couple minutes left. Roz has a question. How do you engage students when you see that they are losing their attention? That's a really great question that I would love to know the answer to as well.
I should really defer to Abby on this one, because when I pop in, it's kind of a rock star moment because they're with their teachers, and then here comes STEM. So I'm going to actually defer to you on this one, but I would just kind of keep coming back to those norms that you set up at the beginning with really strict guidelines.
Yeah, I think that that is one of the biggest challenges of not being physically present with the kids. And I can start to feel them pulling away in the last couple of days. Maybe it's because spring break's about to happen. Maybe they have cabin fever. And, I also have to say that they deserve their space to space out a little bit and not pay attention. There's a lot going on in the world that I'm sure feels a lot more important than in a given moment than the grammar of a sentence that I'm working on with them. And so my biggest advice in that and in all of the things as we all struggle to adapt to this new remote world is having patience, patience with ourselves, patience with our students, remembering that, if they're not paying attention, it's not because they're trying to be bad. They just might be having a rough day. I had one kid who was having such a rough day today, and he's such a superstar student, and just everything was like, I don't understand the directions, and I don't have anything to write about. And I just was so, I wished I could hug him, like I could just see what he was going through right now. And I think that we're not going to be able to control this. I can see my students, their little 12 and 13-year-old brains starting to figure out, how can I look like I'm paying attention, but Ms. Bash won't even know I'll really be playing this video game. The same things they try to do in class, and I don't know that there's a way to control that, except that, I've tried to create lessons that are interesting and exciting and have lots of short little increments that they have to respond to and engage with, and that the technology I'm using, they have to respond to, and I can actually assess where they're at and how much they're absorbing. And on a given day when they're not absorbing much, I have to have patience with myself and with them. So that's my biggest advice to everyone right now as we adapt, that there are going to be a lot of snags and a lot of, mistakes in days that don't go as we wanted to. But it's a learning curve. It really is like learning. I feel like I'm learning how to teach all over again. And I've been in a classroom for over 20 years. And so that kind of humility I think it's good for me, and I think it's good for all of us probably. But just have patience and compassion with yourselves and your kids.
Thank you both so much. And with that, I just wanted to remind everyone that both Abby and Kristen's contacts are up right now. So feel free to follow Kristen on Twitter, email Abby with any questions, and email Ozobot if you have any outstanding questions for us as well. And I just wanted to thank both Abby and Kristen for spending the time with us this afternoon. I know that the audience really appreciated your insights and your expertise, and you both are just such rock stars, and we're so lucky to have you spend an hour with us today. So thank you both so much.
I just wanted to point out another benefit of Minal said that it was nice hearing intelligent adult conversation. So thank you. Thank you for providing that for him.
Yeah.
No, that was exciting.
Yeah, and I just want to also give a shout out to Melissa and thank her. I've learned, Melissa and I are in the same cohort at UCLA, and many of the tools that I now use with my students, I learned from watching Melissa give presentations in our class. So I owe major kudos to Melissa.
Thank you so much, Abby. All right, with that, we'll end our session today. And for those of you who are curious about a recording, this will be recorded and it will be sent to you tomorrow. So feel free to share this with any educators that you think would benefit from it as well. So have a great evening, everyone.
Make sure you check out our webinar page. We're really trying to ramp up our webinar schedule so that we can support you guys through all of this. So make sure you keep an eye on our webinar page, and we'll hopefully be bringing more useful things to you. So thanks,
Yes.
everyone. Oh.
That reminds me, we are hosting one all about using remote Ozobots through ShapeChaser next Friday. So if you're interested in using that in your digital classroom, I highly recommend attending that. I'll be running that next Friday. So your kids won't need bots, but they'll be able to code. So see you all there.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Abby and Kristen. Hi, Melissa.